How's everyone doing? Good? Are you hungry? Tired? Okay. How many techies are in the crowd? Like how many actual developers, hackers, whatever? Okay. Startup people, people applying technology. I'm trying to figure out how to do this. I could talk for 25 minutes. I could also talk for 10, and we can have a conversation for 15. What I'd like to tell you a little bit about is my company and how we apply technology and actually how we do the whole thing. We do a lot of work in AI or whatever AI is called. I actually really dislike that term because it's a very, very loaded term full of bullshit. But we do a lot of crunching of data using quite advanced maths and a lot of pretty big machines to support our product. We started EyeEm as a platform for photographers. We wanted to help amateur photographers who were just getting into this whole thing with their smartphones. We wanted to help them connect, interact, learn from one another, edit their photos, get featured, get published. And as we grew, we realized that we had tapped into some very, very passionate community of people that were creating amazing content, and they were not being discovered. We weren't talking about professional photographers. We were talking about anyone here. We would organize exhibitions. We still organize them. We organize the world's largest photo competition every year. Something like 650,000 photos were submitted to this year's competition. And it's not a simple thing to have that much content and be able to process it, right? One thing we realized was these photographers, over 22 million of them by now, would come up to us and say, what's next? What's beyond the next like as a social signal? What's my validation? And we were getting approached by brands, agencies, and companies that said, you access this authentic sort of imagery that we would love to use. We would love to be able to license and use it for our campaigns. We realized that we had to bring the two things together, right? So what we saw was that, there you go. Cool. So what we realized was, all of this content being created is actually very attractive. It's very beautiful. This is from an exhibition Eric Kessels did, a Dutch artist, something like 7 years ago, where he printed every single photo that was uploaded to Flickr on a single day and threw it around the room. And to me, this sort of signifies the problem that we were dealing with, both in terms of how do we sell content, as well as how do we find the gems, right? Everyone has a really beautiful photo on their phone, surrounded by 5,000 crappy ones. We wouldn't want to exclude you just because you only have one good photo, but we also can't afford to just go through every single photo and manually do it, right? So from the business side, we realized that we could do two things. The first being, whenever that slide shows up, there you go. The first being actually licensing content directly, which we do. We work with some of the most amazing brands that actually buy images from us, including Google, Apple, Boston Consulting Group, tons of agencies, tons of campaigns with Mercedes, with Audi, whatever. They all use us directly because they want to be able to access that content. And then we distribute to, Getty Images, for example. We're the largest distributor on Getty and to all of these other stock sites. But we do it with a way where we realize that in order to empower the photographers that are on EyeEm, we had to be very fair to them. So we have a set price. We would never sell their photos for a cent or two. We share the revenues together with the photographers all the time. So pretty much anyone here could sign up today, start earning money tomorrow. And we've paid out millions over the last years to amateurs. And I myself actually buy camera gear from the photos that I sell. And then the last thing was we realized that we built a lot of technology, which is what I want to get into in a second, that allowed us to automate these processes. So we started licensing that tech. And again, some of you might have phones in your pockets that I can't really talk about publicly, but some of you might have phones in your pocket that are running our technology without you knowing it. The thing that we did, though, we realized that we had to build technology that had a very, very specific purpose. So we weren't doing research, even though we have a huge machine vision research team, around 13 researchers. We weren't doing pure research with the idea of, let's just dream. We actually had very, very clear problems to solve. We needed to understand what was in the photos. We need to be able to describe the photos so that you can search for them, so that we can filter them and curate them. But we also needed to understand, which was a bit more challenging, how the quality of the photos was. So we needed to teach a machine to understand what is beautiful, what isn't, what is commercially viable, what isn't, what is on brand for a certain company and what is not. And I'm going to show you a couple of these demos. And finally, we actually had to run these technologies on the phone. For preserving your privacy, we didn't want you to upload every single photo to the cloud, even though we don't do anything with it, but we thought we had to run this stuff on your device so that it's completely there, completely private. We just surface the really good content and then recommend it to you so you can sell it. So obviously, 22 million photographers uploading hundreds of millions of photos, all the best partners in the world giving us every single signal that we need, and we just plug that technology in the middle, and it's kind of a win-win-win, right? The technology is trained by that data. The technology adds value to the photographers who now know what they're selling and what they're not selling and what kind of content they should shoot. And it does the same for our buyers who don't need to bother a lot. And I'm going to give you a couple of these examples. So on the phone, we call it EyeEm Selects. It runs on your device, it searches for your content, it browses all of your photos, and then it recommends the content that you should upload based on a campaign that is running, based on what a customer is looking for. And if you sort of extrapolate a little bit into the future, we're talking about infinite sourcing by actually allowing a machine to go through your cameras and say, these 5 photos, someone is actually right now trying to buy those kind of photos for a campaign for wherever. If you want, you can earn $100 just by saying yes. So that's kind of pretty interesting, right? But then the hundreds of millions of photos that come up to EyeEm, we need to actually check there whether they're copyrighted or not, whether there's, if you're designers, or if you're in that world, you know that there's things like model releases. So if there's a person on a photo, we can't just license it. We need to get that person to approve that photo to be sold commercially. Same with property releases, if there's logos and if there's so on and so forth. And we do this all automatically. So if you think of it, just this system here, companies like Getty and so on, when they're preparing content to be made available for sale, spend around 60 cents per photo, 60 cents per photo, not per photo sold, to make sure that the photos get curated and to make sure that the photos are checked for quality. When we're talking about hundreds of millions of photos going through the system, we can't do that at scale. We can't spend millions of dollars just having people click on photos. So we do it automatically. And finally, and this is to me, I think, the most exciting part or probably the most exciting part of what we do, is when, the search, I think, is quite broken, right? When you want to find something, you have to actually go and describe it in specific terms, and unless those terms are known by the system. So what we're doing is effectively you're translating the picture you have in mind into words, sending it to the machine, who's then, or to the search engine, that's then translating those words into pictures effectively again. And why do you have to translate twice? So we taught the machine to understand, based on your visual taste, to understand what you're looking for. And the video that I'm trying to run here, I basically downloaded 50 photos from the Instagram minimalism account. The cool thing about minimalism is it's a very broad section of photos, as you'll see here, that just are minimalistic, right? There's people in it, there's buildings in it, there's silhouettes, there's animals, whatever. Did I pause this video by mistake? Oh, there you go. Okay. So these are the last 50 photos on the Minimalism Instagram account. So if you were to look for minimalistic photos, you feed that into the machine. What's happening here is we're training a completely new AI model that is personalized, that understands the notion of minimalism and what that brand kind of language is. And then it goes and searches over 100 million photos on EyeEm and surfaces content. And we do this with a lot of partners that now actually use our custom search with their personalized rank, which is kind of doing that at scale and quite affordably. So, and you'll get a recommendation like this. This is not visual search in the sense of visual similarity. You have post-its, you have architecture, you should have people in there somewhere, you have silhouettes, you've got everything, right? And that kind of is minimalistic, but it's not based on specific keywords. And then you take this, you add to it the keyword search, and suddenly you've changed the way people look for content because they already know what they have in mind, right? Any creative already has sort of a brief. They have 5, 6 photos that kind of are the look and feel that they're going for, and if they can feed those into the system, that system will already understand what's okay and what's not. And now, if you put all of that together, I'm a designer, I'm a brand manager, I'm a creative director. I pump in 5, 6 photos to the system and say, this is kind of the image language that we're looking for, and now I want photos of people playing football in Brazil, right? And we can actually target people in Brazil, send that model over the air, browse their content, or even while they're shooting, tell them, do this, do that, go a little to the left, go a little to the right, we'll shift your perspective, we'll filter the photo. Great, you just made money because you happen to be at the beach. And that's kind of how that whole world is evolving, right? Because the idea of just buying content, it's not going to be big. But if you suddenly actually start adding intelligence on top of that, My co-founder likes to say the cost of an image is not just the money you pay to license it, but it's also the time you spend trying to describe it and the time you spend trying to look for it. And by automating that entire process, you kind of augment both on the creation side and the consumption side. And yeah, and it's just kind of how I look at it, right? This is infinite future when we think about content, right? The idea of content creation being limited to people because there's gates doesn't exist anymore. Anyone here is a creator, anyone out there is a creator, and you use technology to actually leverage that and empower them. And I think that's pretty much it. I would love to actually have a conversation about you and not go through slides, so maybe we can do that now. Thank you.
There is a catch box we can use. Does anybody want to ask a question or have a conversation? This is Baltic crowd. Baltic crowds are really tough, but once you get them going, they really like warm up and so on. So who wants to be the first brave
I
one?
heard that happens after one beer.
Yeah, then yes, but the thing is, they don't serve beer here.
God damn it.
So
come on,
look,
yeah, there you go,
look,
there you go, there you go.
There you are.
Lady in the back, she was
Lady in the
first.
back.
Yeah.
Be ready to catch the box. Throw it, throw it, throw it, because it's so much fun. Yeah, go.
Hi, I'm Elena from Printful. Could you tell us a bit more how you deal with the legal aspect here, specifically the intellectual property, when people take pictures of something that's not okay to sell commercially? Do you integrate with any trademark databases, if that's okay to ask?
It's absolutely okay to ask. I was actually ridiculously surprised when we started doing image licensing, how weird that space is. You know, when it comes to people, it's quite simple, but even that is not something you can fully automate, because in theory, any person that is, if they can recognize themselves on a photo, unless it's a large group of people, so even if I can take a photo of your, you know, your right toe, and somehow you can recognize it because it's absolutely unique, you can sue and I can't sell that photo legally. So it's quite complicated, but we've managed to do a bunch of things, both in terms of setting up heuristics. So one perfect example I like to give is you can sell a photo of the Tour Eiffel in daytime, no problem. But the lighting is actually copyrighted, and you're not allowed to sell it commercially. So if it's lit up at night, you can't sell it. And there's kind of very, very sort of weird little rules here and there that are problematic. We've trained the machine to recognize all of the things that are quite understandable. We flag things where we're not certain. Whenever we see a photo taken inside, we kind of flag it so that you know, someone looks at it, because you need a property release for that. For people, it's quite simple, because typically you just need a model release, and we've built the mechanisms in the apps to actually request the releases and get the releases and have them signed digitally. So it's, you know, if you're doing it manually, it's quite a hassle, but if you're automating it, then it works quite okay most of the time. And we do, at some point, have to offset, to be honest, the responsibility on the photographer. So at some point, we do say, you know, we are assuming that you're uploading this in good faith. And if you try to upload a stolen photo, then effectively it's on you, right? And I think that's absolutely fair. Yep.
Hi, my name is Andrew, and I remember your yesterday lecture about artificial intelligence and creating bias. And I want to ask you about your case, which is attached to, I mean, when you're loading photos and when you're recommending photos in the same style that you loaded. What do you think about this, like creating bias in this case, and like people attach to some style and that's all? In the other words, are you using generative models, maybe, not just discriminative in this case?
Generic models, did you say?
Generative. Do you know?
Oh, generative models, yeah. Cool. So everyone else makes mistakes, we don't. I'm kidding. Obviously, that's a big challenge, right? And confirmation bias is one thing that we were looking at from day one, because if we're saying this is the style, and then we're sorting content based on what we're saying is the style, then all the new content will look exactly like that, and it gets really boring. What we do a couple of different things. One thing we do is we take into consideration what people are buying. We take into consideration what sort of trend scouts and so on are saying this is the new look and feel. We look into data sources that we hadn't seen before, like what brands are posting on Instagram. We look at what our community is liking. So and there's a bit of a sliding window in how we train our models. So the aesthetics model is always being retrained and trying to adapt for that. Obviously, that doesn't solve the problem. If we're the biggest distributor on Getty, then their sales are kind of biased with our data. And that's where personalization comes in. Because what we try to do with the aesthetics is not to say this is the best, this is the less, this is less, but rather to say these are qualitatively good photos, which is kind of a rule of thumb that there'll always be qualitatively good, and these are qualitatively bad photos. And those won't suddenly become good. There's no bias really in there. And then we actually try to personalize based on the individual tastes, where we don't force that one base rule on everyone, but actually different brands, different aesthetics, and so on get somehow surfaced through the verticals. In the end, though, obviously things slip through the cracks. And the idea is what we're trying to do is we're not trying to say this is the rule. These are the top photos of the world ranked 1 to 5 trillion. But rather we're trying to say this is good content and this is less good content, and we try to make sure that as much of the good content gets labeled as good, and as much of the bad gets labeled as bad. And there's always stuff that will slip through the cracks, and that's kind of the risk of automation. We've done some studies, though, that have shown us that humans are actually only around 84% accurate when it comes to that. So even professional photo editors, if you give them a very clear guideline in terms of what is good and what is bad, will make a mistake every 9th photo or every 10th photo. And if the algorithm is as accurate, then we can live with that.
I saw another hand somewhere. Here is one. Can you throw it here? Here in front of her. Excellent.
Okay, you have probably a lot of features in your system, which is great. But for example, what would be the #1 failed feature which you have tried to implement in it? Failed one.
Number one failed feature.
That you tried to implement and thought that it will be amazing, but no, it doesn't work yet, or it can't be achieved yet.
I mean, there's a lot of things where I wouldn't say failed. We fail every day, right? That's kind of the norm. There's a lot of really cool things where we couldn't justify building into our system. So we built some models that would actually learn how to edit your photo to make it look the best way possible. And we realized that doesn't make any sense to integrate it in our system because it was quite heavy. And as a gentleman in the back was asking, there's a lot of work being done on sort of generative deep learning that would take care of that transfer, style transfer and so on. Honestly, I think we fail every day, right? And we realized that we built a feature on the community side that just totally broke how users were interacting with the app, and then you have to rebuild it. And when it comes to deep learning, I think my biggest learning was, which wasn't very deep, was that researchers work completely differently than startups. And this is not a startup, right? If you're applying AI, you're not doing agile, lean development. You're doing 3-month, 6-month research cycles. They might have a result after 2 weeks. They might have a result after 6 months. They might fail completely after 2 months, and you kind of have that black box in the middle of your process. And the number of failed experiments there is more than I'd like to talk about. But I would say 1 in 20, 1 in 30 experiments, maybe even 1 in 100 experiments on the deep learning training side of things, even make it to the stage where we start evaluating. And but that's kind of how this world works, right? So most failures were there, but I wouldn't call them failures because that's part of the process. Hope that answers it.
There is a question there behind.
Nice throw.
That was tough. So I'm just thinking about user experience. I love what you guys are doing, but whenever you have a lot of users, the first thing that comes to my mind is, let's say I upload my photos. And I think they're good, but I have a lot of competitors out there because your platform is quite big. So if I don't see anyone choosing my photos, how do you think, what would motivate me to keep using, to keep uploading? Like, what's the kind of motivation or catch for me? Because I think if you don't see any success, you kind of get bored. right?
Yeah, but I mean, that's kind of the case, that's basically like saying I sign up on Facebook and no one wants to be my friend. How do you solve that? Right? It's the core fundamental question of any social product. In our case, I think what we've figured out is, well, it takes time to sell. So it's not like you'll upload a photo and you'll sell tomorrow. Odds are it takes some time. What we've tried to figure out is how can we break that sort of social cycle and make you getting discovered, you getting published, you getting exhibited, which are things that no one else does, right? So even if your photo doesn't sell, you might make it into a magazine, you might make it into one of our exhibitions. There are all of these motivations around it, and there's just pure fun of getting better at photography. And what we wanted to do from day one was how can we decouple that from social? How can we make sure that you get discovered even if you don't go and follow 5,000 people and have 100 people follow you back and whatever? And we did that through using technology to make, our popular algorithm, for example, is not based on popularity. It's based on, we look at new people, we look at people that are uploading really good content that haven't been discovered, and they get a bigger boost than someone who has been. So we try to implement these mechanisms that help you get discovered if your content is good. But good photographers sometimes will fall through the cracks, and bad photographers will make it up, but they'll get punished by the community because they're not good. And B, effectively, if you're a bad photographer, and if you think you're great but you're not, then it's really hard to find a way. We never looked for the social aspect of it as the main thing, right? Retention for us was never about monthly active users. It was about returning active contributors, high performance users, people that are selling, that are getting exhibited, and that's kind of the core that we were looking at. And for that core, technology does the trick really well, and the offline part of EyeEm, meaning the exhibitions, the magazines, and so on, really complements that perfectly. And that's, I guess, kind of an answer to your question. I don't know.
Exactly an answer to my question, because once you take out the popularity of the algorithm, that just kind of helps the newcomers get exposure, I guess. Because like you said, on every other platform, it is all about popularity, and that kind of creates a lot of spam and fake content and so on. So yes, that is an answer to my question. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's in this case definitely more about quality than quantity. To be honest, I would be lying if I said I'm happy we don't have 1 billion users like Instagram. That would be kind of bullshit, right? It would be great because that would just be more data. But I think one thing that people tell me about EyeEm that use it and that love it is they actually love the fact that it's substantial, right? There's people that they meet their friends. They don't have 1 billion followers. They have maybe 1/10 of the following they have on Instagram, but the quality of the interaction is significantly higher because it's kind of selective, right? And so it's kind of works for us, I think.
Okay. I had a follow-up question for the last one. I also worked in research and engineering for a while, and I've had this kind of researchers coming to me after 4 failed experiments that this completely demotivates me. How do you get this kind of guys motivated to carry on? Because when you just build an app, the success is very quickly visible, but if you're in research, you never know what's the outcome.
Yes, so it's obviously when it comes to building apps, it's kind of different, right? We have very clear metrics, and you know what success is, you know what failure is. Crash-free user experiences, upload times, bundle times, whatever. That's kind of pretty straightforward. On the back end, it's the same. With research, what we did was we effectively split the team or split the workload into 3 different things. The smallest development cycles were something which we called iterative work. That's basically models that have been trained, been productionized, and now it's just about tweaking them. Which typically is, we're talking about 2 weeks to a month, so it's not like you burn 6 months to do that. And then there's the bigger sort of applied cycle, which is when we take research ideas that have been prototyped, that look promising, and start applying them. Again, this is typically something where we know already that we will succeed. It's just a matter of time, so you don't really get frustrated there. And then we have the longer blocks where we say it's more pure research, even though it's not really, it's quite applied, but it's pure in the sense that we don't know how to get there. We have an idea of what we want, and that usually takes 6 months, and people rotate in and out. So you only work on that if you want to work on that. So we don't force someone to do pure sort of research, where we don't know if they're going to succeed or fail if they don't want to do it.
So the research team members can switch between these kind of like jobs or types of jobs.
Yeah. So it's short-term, iterative, and long-term.
We can grab a little bit of time of the break. Let's take one more question from the audience. Does anybody want to ask something more? This guy knows a lot, obviously.
I'm making up as you go.
Now you're Baltic again. Like at some point there were like 3 hands up. Hey, if nothing else, then thank you so much.
Oh, there's a question.
Oh,
There's a question,
look.
There's a question.
Excellent. You need the box because we have live stream. And where is the box? Look, behind you. Okay, they don't even need to throw it. They just can hand it over.
Thank you. Since you've cultivated such a unique community on EyeEm, can you talk a little bit about what are some of the ingredients for really developing a great community and kind of delivering to that community? Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So if I tell you how we started, actually might already be interesting because we started with a photo exhibition. We had no apps. We had a tiny little website, and we reached out to our own circle of friends. I was one of the first people on Flickr back in 2013, I think. My co-founder studied photography. Other 2 co-founders are into art. So it was our own community of friends that was getting involved in the very beginning. It's weird to quote myself, but I always say that you don't create a community, you join one. And that's, I think, exactly what we did with EyeEm. We didn't go like, oh, these people need to be brought together. We were like, there's photographers out there that are looking for a home. Let's create that home, right? And they see that, they sense that. That's one thing. The other is be honest. We don't bullshit. Our photographers, we don't call them users, we call them photographers. And to me, that's kind of always been the mentality because we're photographers ourselves. So we're building something for us, first and foremost. And that allows you to kind of, it's not like, oh my God, let's come up with the next business plan. Photography is the big thing. When we started, everyone was telling us you're idiots because, photography is a kind of or photo sharing or whatever is like a nice hobby project. But the only 2 companies, I'm talking investors now, the only 2 companies that were worth mentioning, because Instagram hadn't been launched back then and hadn't gone big, the only 2 companies were PhotoBucket, which had like a $10 million exit, and Flickr, which had like a $20 million exit. And both of these were totally terrible exits for investors. So they told us, don't do this. And we're like, fuck it, we love photography and we see the potential here. So we're doing it anyway. And I think that authentic language is something that a community appreciates. Whether it scales, I don't know. In the beginning, I was basically accepting friends requests from everyone who joined EyeEm on Facebook, right? And that doesn't really scale. I have 1,000 friends on Facebook that I've never met personally. And that's not something you can do with 22 million photographers. But the things that don't scale in the beginning matter a lot because these people become ambassadors. We have these open door policies. So I have people that come to Berlin and they just show up at our door and knock, and they can actually come in and chill and work at our office because their community, their family. And I think that's really it, right? The language has to map and reflect that, and your values have to reflect that because you can't make that up. Everyone says we're community, blah blah, but if your values don't really, or if you don't really live by your values, then they'll see through that very quickly. So be real and actually love what you're doing, and the people will realize that and they'll be loyal to you.
Thank you. Give them a big applause. This was really good. Thank you so much for coming.